Conchita, wonderful to see you again. Thanks for coming back. You helped us a lot in the past, talking about Ghislaine Maxwell, understanding the Epstein case. You've known Maxwell for 20 years. Were you terribly surprised at what you learned in court?
Well, first of all, Happy New Year, George.
And to you, my dear.
Thank you for having me on your show. And thank you very much for your interest in this very important case, or cases, may I say, because there are several cases pending beside Ghislaine's. Was I surprised? To answer your first question is, I was not surprised, particularly in light of the 3 jurors who have since confessed that they did not tell the truth in their jury application, as you might know. I was not surprised about the witnesses' testimony, particularly Carolyn Andrade's, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And I was not surprised at the way that the case unfolded and that there is a possibility of a mistrial. I said that before. I, in fact, spoke to Emily Maitlis, who interviewed Prince Andrew in that infamous interview. And I said to her, Ghislaine, there might be a mistrial if she's ever taken to court for many reasons. But the most important reason, George, I believe, is that there is a lot of money exchanging hands, and there are a lot of politicians, establishment figures implicated in the case. As you know, there was no plea deal offered by the prosecution to Ghislaine, which is unusual. I mean, it does happen, but it is unusual. So is there going to be a plea deal now? If there is a mistrial, which given the 3 jurors' confessions seems highly likely, will Ghislaine be able to buy her time by pointing fingers if she hasn't done so already? My fear with Ghislaine is exactly the same fear, not that I think, well, let me rephrase that. When Epstein was arrested, 3 days after he was arrested, an active FBI agent told me that he would not make it to trial. And he said to me, quote, there are towels on the inside, which I didn't quite understand what he meant. I did later. And I believe this time round, as I told former Attorney General Barr, that if Ghislaine points fingers and decides to reveal all, she might not make it either. She is in jail. She is in the custody of the Bureau of Prisons, and lots of things can happen.
Very powerful and chilling stuff, Conchita. Let's walk it back for a minute, because not everyone will be as aware as you and I are about what the grounds for a mistrial would be. If I summarize them thus, it turns out that there are 3 people who were on the jury who not only had themselves been victims of child sexual abuse, which goes to show just how prevalent child sexual abuse is, something you know in your work, coming to the aid of children and young people that are trafficked. But not only were the 3 jurors victims of child sexual abuse, they ticked a box on their jury form to say that they were not, had never been victims of child sexual abuse. That's a standout for a retrial, isn't it?
Absolutely. 1 is a standout. 3, most definitely.
I wonder, Conchita, if this was entirely an accident, or if somehow it was contrived.
George, that is the billion-dollar question. And I don't wish to speculate at this moment, because too many things are happening behind the scenes. So perhaps we can talk a little bit later. But I do need to say that and I want to make this clear. When I first broke open the case in 2010, and I spoke to Brad Edwards, who was the attorney who originally represented Virginia Roberts Giuffre, which, by the way, I'm very puzzled that she was not called in as a witness, even though, of course, the prosecutors have every right not to call her as a witness because it's their case and they evidently believed that they had a slam dunk case. So there was no need, based on what they believed was an open and shut case, to call Virginia Roberts Giuffre. However, if you read one of the victims' testimony, she told her story to the Daily Mail, Carolyn, who went by the name of Carolyn during the trial, and she was a witness. And because of her testimony, 4 out of 5 counts of child sex trafficking were obviously won, right? She was found guilty. So Carolyn claims that Virginia told her back in 2001 that she had a photograph of her meeting Prince Andrew. And she also told her that Virginia told her in 2001 that she had sexual relations with the prince. And it was Virginia who sued Maxwell to begin with in September of 2015, right before the 2016 presidential elections. And it was also the year that David Boies, unheard of, would take on the case of a victim such as Virginia. Now, I can tell you the backstory offline, but the point is, all this is tied together. And I think today's report, Carolyn's report and Carolyn's story is going to shed a very important light on the relationship and why Virginia was not called in as a witness, why perhaps there's going to be a mistrial, perhaps, and how this is going to move forward. And what are the repercussions in this case, because there are many. And as you know, Jean-Luc Brunel, who was the third key procurer, using his modeling agency MC Squared, he is now sitting in a Paris prison awaiting trial as well. So there are many dangling elements to this case.
Yes, indeed. Now, she'll remain in prison. She
Yes.
will be sentenced unless the mistrial is declared
Correct.
peremptorily in advance of the sentencing, which I suppose might be possible, but it's quite likely that she'll be sentenced. She'll remain in prison. She won't get bail because all the reasons for not granting her bail remain extant. So your theory is that maybe that would be the time that the state, the prosecutor, would offer a plea bargain. For that plea bargain to be credible, it would still have to involve her spending many years behind bars, wouldn't it, Conchita?
Well, I would presume, again, this is a presumption, I would presume it would, because as you know, under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is the federal law, the statute that would put Ghislaine behind bars, a mandatory minimum is 20 years. So at least 20 years under TVPA, which is the reason I wrote the book, the reason I followed the case, the reason I have spent 11 years following this case very closely, because there are 3 things that we need to understand that I hope you, George, and the rest of your colleagues make this visible. 1, TVPA and your UK laws equivalent to TVPA must be enforced across all jurisdictions. So number 2, this is no longer an emerging markets issue, which is what everyone thought of back in 2010, that this was just poor criminals trafficking children. No, you now have rich men and financial institutions that enable the very rich to continue and to create and to facilitate child sex trafficking operations. That's very important. And number three, that child sex trafficking is a billion-dollar global industry. And those were the three reasons I wrote the book, the three reasons I continue to follow this case, and the reasons that this has become my life mission, because we must together stop child sex trafficking.
Amen. The book that you've written, the work that you're doing is truly magnificent. But let me just pick up one point that you made. This is not poor criminals trafficking children. This is rich men and women, we now can say, in the case of Maxwell. But not just rich men and women trafficking children, but trafficking them for other rich men and women, and powerful men and women. After all, one of the great unanswered questions of the Ghislaine Maxwell affair surely is that, was she pimping for Epstein alone? Was she trafficking for Epstein alone? Or were all these rich and powerful men who swarmed over the townhouses and the ranches and the islands because they were so drawn to the magnetic personality of Jeffrey Epstein, were they also involved in this sordid criminal enterprise? Were they the end users?
Amen. And all of that and all your questions are going to be answered in my upcoming book, Buried Secrets. So you will learn the answers to all your questions in that upcoming book.
When is that book coming out?
Hopefully by the end of this year or by the fall of 2022.
Okay, I look forward very much to interviewing you, Conchita, when publication comes along. Meanwhile, I'm extremely grateful to you for joining us this evening, as I was on the previous occasions that you did so. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining me.